Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. It's wonderful to have you here, a great honor to have you here with me, and of course, a great pleasure for me to be here with you. I'm very happy to see you, as always. I hope that in addition to seeing me, that you can hear me, and if you would do me the favor of hitting the raise your hand icon in the interface just to let me know that I can in fact be heard. I would appreciate that very much. So there's a little, there we go. All right, very good. I'm happy to know that I can be heard. Thank you very much. I will go ahead and lower your hands for you because I am the webinar Ishvara, so to speak. Let me share my screen with you once again so that we can run through just a little bit of housekeeping, as is our usual habit here for our evening classes. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options in the upper right-hand corner. You need not worry about your microphone or video camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. If you would like to be heard, then you can type into the Q&A or the chat window. I've been meaning to update this one slide for weeks, and I keep forgetting until this very moment, week after week. Anyway, at any point in time, any questions, any comments, go ahead and pop them into the chat or to the Q&A box. I will be looking for them there. In our last class, we began chapter 14, the yoga of seeing, the qualities of material nature, otherwise known as the gunas, something that if you have taken a yoga teacher training is spoken of in usually fairly general or even superficial terms. I personally think that this is one of the most important topics of the Bhagavad-gita because it provides a lens for seeing the world and seeing ourselves that really changes what we see in a very, very dramatic way. So as we introduce the chapter, getting into this idea of seeing the world as a combination of interactions of different qualities or threads or modes of material nature, we spoke a little bit about patriarchal religion and why God is male. You can get the replay of episode 79 if you missed it to find out what I'm talking about there. We also spoke about the interdependence of God and God's energies, or how the energy of the Supreme Being and the Supreme Being are one and yet different. And we're going to elaborate on that a little later in the class this evening. And then we finally got to our introduction of the three gunas. We covered verses 1 through 8. This evening, we'll get into more detail about the qualities of material nature as we cover verses 9 through 15. So that's our plan. Let's see how we do with our plan. For those of you who are new to our evening class, we always begin by chanting this invocation mantra. It is traditional in a class on yoga philosophy that the speaker will lead the chanting of an invocation mantra to his particular Ishta Devata, meaning the particular form of the absolute truth that is his worshipable form or resonates with him or her. And in my case, Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva, who is Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita, is that Ishta Devata. So a little bit about transliterated Sanskrit. The dot over the M indicates that we close our lips in front while at the same time bringing the back of our tongues up to the soft part of the back of the roof of our mouths. A bar across a vowel indicates an elongated open version of that vowel, in this case an A and ah, as opposed to the same vowel without the bar being a slightly truncated version and a little more closed up in the case of an A. So I will chant this mantra, and then if you like, you can chant the mantra back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence. All right, so last week we introduced the three qualities or components or strands or modes of material nature. And these three modes or qualities can be thought of as the most fundamental elements of material reality. If you were to look at a periodic table and see the breakdown of material elements down to atomic particles and such like that, that's how material science measures what the world is made of. In yoga philosophy, we also have a metaphysics. That is to say, we go beyond the physical elements to the metaphysical makeup of the world. And when we get to the most basic component parts, we find these three qualities that we can think of as primary colors that, when combined, make up every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing in the material world. And the objective of this chapter is to reveal how we can recognize these different modes. So the first one, the mode of goodness, or in Sanskrit, sattva, is pure and illuminating. It's characterized by knowledge, clarity of thought, detachment from materialistic things, and it results in knowledge, the elevation of consciousness, and, not inconsequentially, happiness. The mode of goodness, or sattva, is not the same thing as intelligent. You can be a very simple person and be very pure of heart, and therefore under the influence of the mode of goodness. The mode of passion, rajas, is born of hankering, born of desires. It's characterized by a distortion of intelligence on account of an intense desire to acquire something that will please the senses. Therefore, intense endeavor, striving with attachment to results. And the result of this mode of nature is greed, anxiety, misery, stalled spiritual progress. And this is not exactly the same thing as enthusiasm. It is action, but you can be enthusiastic in the mode of goodness. The last one, ignorance, tamas, is born of delusion. It's characterized by insanity, apathy. It results in illusion and foolishness, being violent, belligerent towards others for no good reason, and the degradation of consciousness. It's not the same as stupid. You can be very intelligent about your destructive activity and therefore be intelligent in the mode of ignorance. So that brings us a little bit further along in our introduction to the qualities of material nature. And then in these verses 9 through 15, Krishna is going to go into these details that I have just summarized. So, as is our usual program, I will go through the translation of each of the verses that we're going to cover this evening. Then we'll go back to each verse and look at each verse in detail. So as I have summarized the qualities of material nature, and Krishna is about to go into each of these modes of nature in each of these verses, you will see that I'm not just making this stuff up. So, verse number 9, translation, Krishna continues to speak to Arjuna. This is an extension of his reply to the question that Arjuna asked at the very beginning of the last chapter. So Krishna continues, O descendant of Bharat, a name for Arjuna, the quality of goodness binds one to happiness. Passion binds one to fruitive action, and ignorance, covering one's knowledge, binds one to foolishness. Verse 10, sometimes the quality of goodness prevails, subduing the qualities of passion and ignorance, O descendant of Bharata. Similarly, passion becomes prominent when it prevails over goodness and ignorance becomes prominent when it holds sway over goodness and passion. Verse 11, it is said that when the clear light of knowledge illuminates all the gates of the body, then the quality of goodness prevails. Text number 12. Greed, striving with great effort, ambition, stress, and restlessness arise when the quality of passion is ascendant, O chief of the Bharatas. Verse 13, darkness, inertia, madness, and bewilderment arise when the quality of ignorance prevails, O son of Kuru. Text 14, when one leaves one's body while influenced by the quality of goodness, one attains the pure world of the great sages. And text 15, when one meets death under the influence of the quality of passion, they take birth among those who cling to fruitive action. And when one dies under the influence of ignorance, they are born from the wombs of the foolish. All right, so now we'll go back and take a close look at each of these verses. Going back to verse number 9, I will share my screen with you once again because we are going to chant this verse. So a few more notes about the transliterated Sanskrit. So for those of you who are new to our satsang, transliterated Sanskrit is Sanskrit rendered in the Roman alphabet. And when it's done in accordance with the academically accepted way, you have diacritical marks that appear as dots and dashes and tildes and things that give an indication as to how one should pronounce a particular letter or a combination of letters. So we already covered the dot over the M. The tilde over an N indicates that you put a kind of Y sound into the N. It's a nya sound. A dot under an H is going to mean just a short stop on that vowel that precedes it, unless the dot under the H appears at the end of a word, at the end of a line, in which case a short version of the vowel that precedes the H is echoed back. A dot under an N indicates that rather than putting one's tongue behind one's teeth, you'll make almost a trill sound, or rather you'll make a sound with the tip of your tongue further back against the cliff behind the ridge behind your top teeth, na, as opposed to na. A dot under an R, that's where your trill is going to be. So instead of it will be ra. The dot under the H at the end of a line appears in the third line, and I think that covers, oh, no, one more thing. Two more things. A J before an N with a tilde loses its J sound and becomes more of a G sound, G. So you get G. And then a Y at the end of a word doesn't make a E sound. Rather, it makes a Y sound that kind of flows right into the vowel of that begins the next word. And that, I think, covers everything in this verse. You will notice that there's a cadence. This is an 8-syllable per line verse. Therefore, the cadence takes into account that there will be 8 syllables. So here we go. I will chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Sattvam sukhe sanjayati Raja karmani bharata Jnanam avritya tu tamaha Pramade sanjayatyuta. Translation once again. O descendant of Bharata, the quality of goodness binds one to happiness. Passion binds one to fruit of action, and ignorance, covering one's knowledge, binds one to foolishness. So there are a couple of key words in this verse. For starters, O descendant of Bharata is simply a name for Arjuna, indicating his lineage. And Krishna uses different names for Arjuna, indicating his family heritage and such. So this is just one of those such occasions. The other key word here is binds. Sanjayati means binds or ties one. So guna, in addition to meaning quality of something or a mode of something, a mode of action, a mode of being, also means a rope, something that ties one to a particular way of being or a particular kind of action. That obliges one to respond to different kinds of stimuli in a particular way. So here, goodness binds one to happiness, which is to say that a person who is cultivating the mode of goodness and is therefore increasing the influence of the mode of goodness in their life becomes satisfied, becomes content, experiences happiness as opposed to pleasure. Pleasure is the satisfaction of the senses and is the objective of one that is bound by the mode of passion. Whereas happiness is the symptom of someone who is under the influence of and therefore bound by the mode of goodness. So you get attached to this happiness. Now, it's happiness, which is great, but it's still material. And for the transcendentalist, the objective is to use the quality of goodness as a platform, as a jumping off point to transcend the qualities of material nature altogether. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through these verses. So there's still a problem, even though the quality of goodness is better than passion and ignorance, as Krishna clearly stated in the previous verses from last week's class. These are hierarchical modes. They are not all on the same even playing field. the mode of goodness is understood to be better than the others. But still, better is not necessarily the best. And sometimes better can even be the enemy of the best. When you're really attached to better, you may not let it go in order to get the best. So someone, therefore, can be stuck in the mode of goodness on account of this being bound to or attached to the happiness that comes as a result. Passion binds one to fruitive action. Fruitive action means action where you expect to get something, like you go to work and you get a paycheck. You get a paycheck and you go buy stuff. Or you can pay for things that you want that will satisfy your senses. And you can get caught in a cycle of constantly pursuing the pleasures of the senses, and that's called going to work. I was listening to someone speak about this phenomenon, which is, of course, what most of us do. And he was telling the story of seeing a billboard on a major highway where thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people went to work and came home from work. And the billboard said, "Why do you do this every day?" This is an example of the mode of goodness speaking to the mode of passion. Asking those who are in the mode of passion, have you been self-reflective about why you are doing this? What is it that you are getting out of this? And we can ask ourselves, at the end of our lives, is this what we will have wished we had been doing with our time, however much time we have? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to work. But what's being suggested here is we should know why. And that our reason should be connected to a higher purpose than just running through the hamster wheel of making money to please the senses, all of which will be finished at the end of this life. And the last verses that we'll cover this evening talk about this end of life situation. Finishing up this verse, ignorance covering one's knowledge binds one to foolishness. In other words, someone under the influence of the mode of ignorance cannot help but act like a fool. And therefore, if we do not want to be foolish, we want to resist the influence of the mode of ignorance and do our best to purify our hearts and elevate our consciousness in such a way so that we don't find ourselves obliged to behave foolishly. So any questions about this verse, go ahead and pop them in the chat or in the Q&A, whatever is more convenient for you. A last note about this verse. One of the main qualities of the mode of goodness is gives one the ability to confer blessings. That is to say, someone influenced by the mode of goodness becomes a blessing to others, is able to give genuine benedictions for the benefit of people. Whereas the main quality of the mode of passion is that it impels vigorous activity. And we may even see some people are altruistic when they're successful. They will engage in philanthropy, which is also very good. It's the mode of passion in the mode of goodness. And this gives you an idea of how sometimes these things can overlap. The mode of goodness can be nested inside the mode of passion and vice versa. And then finally, the main quality of tamas is that because of the absence of light, you get darkness. It obscures your intelligence, gives you a distorted view of reality. So people who are under the influence of the mode of ignorance do not see things as they are. Which brings us to our next verse, verse number 10. Translation again. Sometimes the quality of goodness prevails, subduing the qualities of passion and ignorance. O descendant of Bharat, similarly, passion becomes prominent when it prevails over goodness and ignorance becomes prominent when it holds sway over goodness and passion. So, interestingly here is that there's a kind of competition between these qualities of material nature. And sometimes goodness wins out over passion, sometimes passion wins out over ignorance, sometimes ignorance wins out over both. There's almost like a tug of war, three-way tug of war going on between these gunas. And this is a combination of two things. One, it's our free will in the choices that we make. We are attracted to a particular kind of food due to the qualities of material nature that we're influenced by. But when we hear about these modes of material nature, then we may make a conscious choice to up-level our choices in, for example, what we eat, the kind of people we hang out with, the kind of work we engage in, or the motivation of our work may change as the influences of the modes of material nature change. So these choices indicate two things. The modes that we're influenced by, and then it becomes reinforcing. We attract more of that mode. So if we make a conscious choice to do something in the mode of goodness, then we attract more goodness to us and become more and more influenced by that mode of goodness. But it requires that we make a conscious choice. And we may not even realize that we're doing this right away. In other words, we can make these kinds of choices without explicitly understanding, oh, this is the mode of goodness, this is the mode of passion, etc. But once you know what these modes are, then you begin to recognize them when you see them. So action in the mode of goodness invites more of the mode of goodness, action in the mode of passion invites more of the mode of passion, etc. So here's the other thing that determines our particular mode. You may recall from our last class that Durga Devi, or Maya Devi, is the personification of the qualities of material nature. So Durga Devi, or Maya, means that which is not, illusion. So we've spoken about the theology of the Bhagavad-gita, or the theology behind the Bhagavad-gita. And Krishna has described how he expands himself in the process of creating the material world. So here we see the four-armed form of Vishnu, which is an expansion of Krishna, glancing at material nature in the form of the expansion of the goddess of fortune, to take on this particular task of orchestrating, facilitating the creation of the material world. But once the material world is created, then Maya Devi is an active participant. That is to say, when we have a particular material desire associated with these modes of material nature, then the gunas act under the direction of Maya Devi in order to respond to our karma and our desires. And when we start to gravitate towards transcendental knowledge, she takes on the task of testing us by sending things in the modes of material nature we have been habitually attracted to see if we aren't still attracted to them, to see if we would still rather have our pleasures of the material world as opposed to moving on to the spiritual world. So this is a kind of esoteric idea, the idea that the qualities of material nature are being conducted by a person who is the personification of those very qualities of material nature. We're going to come back to this in just a few minutes. Once again, any questions about anything that I'm speaking about, please go ahead, pop them in the chat at any time or in the Q&A box. Meanwhile, the next 3 verses, 11, 12, and 13, are going to explain the effects, how the effects of the modes of material nature are manifested. That is, what shows up on account of these modes. And these verses are very, very useful for self-study, or svadhyaya, study of the nature of the self, which involves both the understanding of our psychology as we currently are and the mechanics of illusion that have created the state of being that we identify with as being who we are, as opposed to our objective, true nature that is changeless in the background of all of the constantly changing states of mind and states of body that we experience and think of as being ourselves. Remember earlier, or some of you may recall that earlier, we heard from Krishna that one who actually sees things sees that the qualities of material nature are interacting, whereas the self proper is not really doing anything other than identifying with these qualities of material nature. So in these 3 verses coming up, we will see how the effects of the qualities of material nature appear in the world. So verse 11, it is said that when the clear light of knowledge illuminates all the gates of the body, then the quality of goodness prevails. When Krishna says it is said, that's synonymous with one can understand, or you should understand. It is said refers to who is saying? The sages who actually have some genuine insight into this sort of thing by virtue of being self-realized, or the Vedic scriptures of which the Bhagavad-gita is a part, and that Krishna himself references as authoritative sources of knowledge. So it is said, it is to be understood that. The clear light of knowledge illuminating the gates of the body. So we have different gates, which are essentially senses, input, output devices, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, etc. So when each of these input and output devices are illuminated by knowledge, then the quality of goodness prevails. Think of it like a halo. When you see a painting or an illustration of someone who is understood to be a saintly person, then they glow. They have a halo. So this indicates the presence of the mode of goodness. When one's speech is always indicative of someone whose consciousness is elevated. When one expresses feelings that are associated with a pure heart, compassion, gentleness, generosity. In the earlier chapter, Krishna gave a definition of knowledge, and he gave a whole list. And then he said, anything that's not this is ignorance. So when each action of a person reflects in some way this standard of knowledge that Krishna has set, that Krishna has delineated, then it's understood that the quality of goodness is present in this person, and therefore that person can be trusted to have an accurate perception of reality as it naturally occurs. This is the kind of person that we want to associate with if we ourselves want to acquire the quality of goodness. Our next verse, verse 12, now shows us the results of the mode of passion. Greed. So this is verse 12 again. Greed, striving with great effort, ambition, stress, and restlessness arise when the quality of passion is ascendant, O chief of the Bharatas. So restlessness. You ever feel like you want something, but you don't know what it is? You're just kind of hankering for something, but I don't even know what it is. Feeling restless, but I don't know why. You wake up at night and you're just like fidgety. FOMO, a modern condition, fear of missing out, constantly having to check one's digital device. Anyway, you get the idea. It's not very far away. I'm afflicted with FOMO. I also just like to know what time it is. Anyway, the mode of passion is kind of predominant in modern life, and especially in modern urban life. If you're living in a city, you've got the mode of passion big time in your environment. And when you get away from it, you can really feel it. And when you know what it is you're feeling, you can recognize it. My hometown is New York City, and I've been away for a while. And by comparison, the little town that likes to think it's a city because the federal government is here, that I currently live in, it seems, kind of slow. I mean, I'm not associated with the government. I don't work with any company that deals with lobbying or anything like that. So, my friends, people tell me that there's like, a real lot of mode of passion in Washington, D.C. And certainly if you believe the news, then it's tons of passion here, and I'm inclined to believe it. But I don't feel it because I'm just not part of that part of Washington, D.C. But as soon as I show back up in New York City, boom, I totally feel like the whole place just rocking with the mode of passion. So similarly, if you spend some time in a rural setting, someplace that's very peaceful, and then you go back to a crazy busy place, you can see it. Whereas if you go to on a vacation and you go to like another city or to someplace where the joint is jumping, where enjoyment is the order of the day, well, you'll still be in the mode of passion. You won't notice that anything has changed if you come back to your city. So let's look at a few of the key words in this particular verse. Lobha means greed, the first word of the verse. So avarice, stinginess with regard to wealth, not wanting to give anything away, to hoard wealth and then keep it for yourself. This tends to be a symptom of the mode of passion. Pravriti means restlessness with no specific purpose or reason, just like I'm restless, I'm antsy. That when you feel that way, that's the mode of passion working on you. Arambaha is the next word, means fruitive activities, where you really want the result. That you're very, you're doing something because you want to get something out of it for yourself. Asamaha means agitation of the senses. There are certain foods that are said to be in the mode of passion, and that's going to show up in a later chapter. And Krishna is going to circle back to this to go into some detail about different things, different elements of the world that are repositories of these different qualities of material nature. So certain foods will agitate your senses. And by agitation, I don't mean just like how kiwis make the roof of my mouth feel like it's itchy and growing hair on it, which is why I don't eat kiwis. But I just mean like, you know, your senses are stimulated or even over stimulated. Here's an experiment for some of you. Try not eating garlic for a month. Then have something that has a lot of garlic in it. You'll probably feel like your veins are on fire. We don't notice these things if we're habituated to them. And then spriha means craving for the gratification of the senses. So when the senses are screaming, I want this, and just demand to be satisfied, that is the mode of passion. Which brings us to verse 13. Darkness, inertia, madness, and bewilderment arise when the quality of ignorance prevails. So aprakasha means the absence of light. Is a negating prefix in Sanskrit. So prakasha, light, aprakasha, the absence of light. So darkness. The desire not to do anything, inertia. That's, you know, when you're spent, pooped out, that's when the mode of ignorance is there. Craziness, loss of sanity, not being able to tell fact from fiction. We are in danger as a society, particularly here in America, of being bewildered by the mode of ignorance on purpose. The inability to distinguish truth from untruth is a function of the mode of ignorance. And that kind of debilitation is one of the first orders of business for a totalitarian government. If you don't know how to think anymore, if you can't distinguish what is true from what is not true, if you can have facts, but then you can also have alternative facts, and then anything can be a fact. This is the quality of ignorance prevalent. All right, let me know if you have any questions about these products of the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Meanwhile, here's something I would like for us to look at in terms of these qualities. So last week I showed you this visual of how the qualities of material nature are hierarchical. Tamagun on the bottom, least desirable mode, then Rajagun, quality of passion, a little better. Sattvagun, that's what we're shooting for. We are, as a general rule, being conducted by the qualities of passion and ignorance. And if you do a little self-analysis, you may find that this is true. I know it's certainly true for myself. And so I am trying to endeavor, I'm trying to be motivated to endeavor to get to the quality of goodness or sattva gun. And that becomes our launching pad for Shuddha Sattva, or transcendental consciousness, whereas you cannot, consciousness, I'll fix that in the next slide. Anyway, you can't get to transcendence from the lower modes. You need to do it step by step. So these are the essential elements, the baseline elements of material nature. And I've spoken in the past about how the material world is comes about by virtue of a transformation of energies, which is to say there is a transformation of spiritual energy to material energy. So material energies are threefold: tamagun, rajagun, sattvagun, the quality of ignorance, quality of passion, quality of goodness. And they combine in innumerable ways to show us this material world that we are currently experiencing. So, if these material energies come about as a result of a transformation of spiritual energies, then what are the spiritual energies that are being transformed? If this produces the varieties of material existence, then how are these energies produced? They are a transformation of spiritual energies. And that spiritual energy is one that shows up as three. So this will be some new information about terms that I have used in the past. Remember, the three component parts of the spiritual atmosphere are sat, eternality, chit, knowledge, and ananda, or bliss. These are different ways of saying pretty much the same thing, except now they're spoken about in terms of spiritual energies. So Krishna himself has a form that is made of these three elements, and the spiritual environment that is Krishna's world is also made of these three elements, beginning with Sandhini Shakti, or existential potency, otherwise known as Sat, or eternality, eternal existence. It is the nature of spirit to be. Next, the Samvit Shakti, or cognitive potency, that is to say, the energy of awareness or cognition, knowledge. So therefore, this would be analogous to the Chit portion of spiritual energy, or spiritual nature. And then finally, Hladini Shakti, or pleasure potency, otherwise known as Ananda, or bliss. So just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. This comes from a book called Bhagavad-gita by Srila Jiva Goswami, who is a teacher of Bhakti Yoga in the tradition of the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, which is the lineage that I am learning spiritual knowledge within, and therefore the perspective from which I am sharing spiritual knowledge with you. So here we have one source, one absolute truth that manifests spiritually in these three categories. And just as the material modes of material nature combine to make every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing in the material world, these three spiritual energies combine together to create the unlimited varieties of spiritual experience. And I bring this up to make the point that as below, so above. That is to say, the material world, with all of its varieties, is a distorted reflection of the spiritual reality. So remember earlier, we had this illustration where the expansion of Krishna and his forearm form of Vishnu glances at the material nature, who does not approach Vishnu directly, but keeps some distance. And Krishna, or Vishnu, is never under the influence of his material energy. Well, if the material world is kind of a distorted, upside down and backwards version, or kind of a reflection, a distorted, illusory version of the spiritual reality, then the inverse would be true in the spiritual world, which is to say that Krishna comes under the control of the personification of his own Hladini Shakti, Radha. So to get the sequence complete here, Krishna is the source of the Vishnu expansions. Radha is the source of the Lakshmi expansions, ultimately going to Mahavishnu and Durga Devi for the sake of the creation of the material world, respectively. And all of this adds up to one complete, absolute truth that manifests in a multiplicity of forms. Material forms on the one hand, spiritual forms on the other hand. Material relationships and activities on the one hand, and spiritual relationships and activities on the other. So in the material world, we are propelled by a desire for enjoyment. And in the spiritual world, we are propelled by a desire for Krishna's enjoyment. And when the Hladini potency is conferred on someone whose pure heart has evolved to the point of pure devotion, as described by Krishna in previous chapters, then Krishna actually comes under the control of such a person, as in this illustration of Radha and Krishna. So now here's the thing about this. Krishna brings this spiritual atmosphere with him when he appears in the material world for the sake of, for example, speaking the Bhagavad-gita, as in verse 9 of chapter 4, wherein he says, "O Arjuna, one who knows the truth about the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving their body, take birth again in this material world. They come to me instead." Well, this is what coming to me looks like. So when we understand the transcendental nature of Krishna, then our destination upon leaving our body in this behind in this material world is very, very well, it's something to look forward to. It's a very, very fortunate situation. Therefore, Krishna encourages us to come to this understanding, which brings us to our last two verses for the evening, wherein Krishna describes how the modes affect our experience of leaving our body. So verse 14, when one leaves one's body while influenced by the quality of goodness, one attains the pure world of the great sages. It's still in the material world, but it's certainly a far more elevated situation than one might have where one is at the moment. This is the idea that there are other places to go in the universe, other than planet Earth, that are very elevated places. Or even if one takes birth again on this planet, the nature of one's birth will be very auspicious insofar as one will be able to immediately have access to transcendental knowledge and make further progress in one's spiritual life. So this is a little bit of a reiteration of what Krishna has said before. Arjuna asked earlier, what happens to the yogi who does not complete the path of yoga to the point of perfection. And was it all a big waste of time? Is it all for nothing? And Krishna says, no. One who is cultivating elevation of consciousness, purity of heart by the practice of yoga, even if they don't finish, even if they don't perfect their yoga practice, they take their next birth in a situation that allows them to pick up where they left off and make further progress. So this means that the yogi is influenced by the quality of goodness and, with any luck, is influenced by this quality at the moment when one leaves one's material body. By contrast, in verse 15, Krishna tells us, when one meets death under the influence of the quality of passion, one takes birth among those who cling to fruitive action. When one dies under the influence of ignorance, they are born from the wombs of the foolish. So with the mode of passion, we can understand, someone who takes birth in a family of, someone who's really into making money. They're attracted to making money by virtue of the mode of passion and the influence of the mode of passion on them. Therefore, they take birth in a situation where they have an opportunity to pursue that interest in accordance with their karma. And Maya Devi will provide them with every opportunity that they need to become further entangled in the material world due to the influence of the mode of passion. The mode of ignorance, the direct translation is wombs of the foolish. Of course, there's not just women involved in this, but the source of their birth will be not just foolish people, well, technically, from a spiritual standpoint, foolish people, but not just necessarily people occupying a human form of life. One developed in the mode of ignorance takes birth in a body that is limited in its scope. We can take birth in an animal form. Not necessary, it's not mandatory that we must take birth in a human body. As our consciousness degrades, then the body we get becomes more and more limited. That is to say, and I've spoken about this before, a tiger has to act like a tiger and is not going to be reflective about how is it that I become a tiger. The special gift of a human form of life is the capacity for reflection. How did I get like this? Why are things the way they are? Now, of course, we can't read an animal's mind. We have to accept some authority on the subject of how the qualities of material nature work. And according to the yoga wisdom texts, one can take birth in lower forms of life than a human being and then be obliged by these qualities or bound by these qualities to act in accordance with that nature in a very restricted way. Therefore, a dog has to act like a dog, a cat has to act like a cat, a fish has to act like a fish, etc. And earlier in the Gita, when Krishna says even a little advancement on the path of yoga can save one from the greatest danger, it is understood that this greatest danger of which he is speaking is that one may fall down into a lower life form that does not allow for the higher engagements of introspection and spiritual inquiry. And that is that. And if you have any questions, now is a really good time for them, as we are just about out of time. Just to reiterate what we did this evening, chapter 14, the yoga of seeing the qualities of material nature, and we looked at some of the details associated with these qualities of material nature. according to Krishna in verses 9 through 15. I anxiously await your questions, and if you have none now, but you find you have some later, please write to me, hari@hari-kirtana.com. I am always looking forward to hearing from you, and will be happy to reply to any of your questions that come after the fact, or if you are watching this in the replay, the perpetual replay next week. We will continue with chapter 14, and we will speak about what you get and where you go in a little more detail with regard to these qualities of material nature. We will cover verses 16 through 20, and that's a wrap. Thank you very, very much for joining me this evening. I'm always very honored to have you here with me, either live, as many of you are now, and as many others will be after the fact. Oh, we got something from Nicole. I have been contemplating the idea of the inner world. What does it really mean? Is that your thoughts and emotions? Excellent question. So our inner world, it's kind of like Russian dolls. There are layers. And pratyahara in yoga is turning the senses inward in order to cultivate that inner life. The life of the mind is usually our first stop. So the mind is the faculty of discerning what we like and what we don't like. And then with the intelligence, taking it one step deeper, we can ask, why do we like this and not that? Why are we averse to this and not that, etc.? So attachments and aversions are listed in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as 2 of the 5 obstacles to yoga. And as you suggest, as you have been called to a more contemplative life, where we consider, where do these likes and dislikes come from? That's a very, very rare thing. Most of us are simply consumed by our likes and dislikes in the pursuit of one and the avoidance of the other. And when we stop and start to ask ourselves about these likes and dislikes, then we've entered into the inner life of contemplation to try to understand what's going on with our mind. Why is my intelligence this particular way? And these qualities of material nature are what make up our particular psychologies. And when we hear about these qualities of material nature, now the intelligence has tools with which to engage in observation and analysis of what's going on inside of us. So that is what svadhyaya means. Guidance from a teacher, from scripture, yoga wisdom texts, to understand the mechanics of illusion, how we came to be what we appear to be, and question whether or not what we appear to be is who we really are. And our spiritual practices that elevate us to the mode of goodness allow us to expand and deepen our range of vision so that we actually can see these qualities of material nature working in the world, working on us, and then be able to gradually rise above them. So I hope that is a satisfactory answer for now, and please let me know how I did with that. And if you have any follow-up questions, then you know where to find me, and I would be more than happy to take this discussion further with you if you so desire. But okay, good. You're very welcome. All right. Out of time. That's it. Show's over. Thank you very, very much for spending your evening with me. Always an honor to have you here with me, and a great pleasure for me to be here with you. I will send you the customary email tomorrow with the links to the recordings if too much is never enough. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.